Let us pray. O God, take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for you. Amen. If you haven't had a chance yet, walk or drive by the Esplanade, that little stretch of parkland between Storrow Drive and the Charles River. All the trees are in bloom, suddenly alive in spring pastels, pink and white, and misty yellow-green of the weeping willows. Only a few days ago when Bob and I walked there, the branches were mainly gray and bare. In Boston, we optimistically call this season spring. The church calls this season Eastertide, the 6 weeks following Easter for an extended celebration of the news of that day. If it took us 6 weeks to prepare in Lent for Easter, it will take us at least 6 weeks to absorb its wonderful and odd claim, to wrestle with its assertion. But spring helps make the case because all around us new life appears where it seemed for months winter there was only death, as if a closed tomb. Bulbs hidden under all that snow we had this year have risen as daffodils and tulips. I wish I were more of a gardener, understood better the rhythms of nature and the science behind growth. What could I learn from my garden about my own human development, how I continue to grow, to mature, to ripen into the full person I can be, my truest self, because that is my hope. What lessons could I glean if I paid closer attention to one little tree branch, how its tight fist of buds relinquish their hold and open into petals of a cherry blossom, how those neighborhood bees and trees cooperate, the bees meeting the trees' need for pollination while gathering pollen for their own honey, how flowers do have to drop away then before the leaves form, before the fruit pushes forth, before sun can ripen that fruit to completeness. In my life, what do I hold too tightly in my fists? What mutual help can I and my neighbors offer one another? What beautiful treasure blossoms must fall away so the next step forward in our growth can occur? The parable of the vine and branches read today by Jim Power is a nature study of this sort. And all week long I've been marveling about vineyards and how grapes are grown. I've been trolling on the web about it, and a few years ago I was able to spend some time with the owner of a small vineyard in the Finger Lakes region of New York, not far from Ithaca and Cornell. Bob and I and our children met with him, and we learned with him about his family who had migrated here from Germany after growing wine grapes there for centuries. Once in this country, they'd had to use a lot of science and careful research to understand which grapes would thrive in New York's soil, this different soil and with the different weather conditions. Now, the vine is what looks to me like a gnarly, stunted old tree covered in gray bark. Looks like almost like tree roots above the ground, the part of the plant that remains from year to year. Each year, after the grapes have been harvested, the vine is retained, but all the leaves, all the branches, the parts that I really always thought of as the vine are cut back again. And new branches grow each year, supporting new fruit. Lengthy tendrils of leaves sprout to cover the grape clusters from too much sun. If the branches aren't cut back at the end of the season, they'll just keep spreading, and the vine's energy is dissipated, expended on those elongated branches rather than on the fruit. To grow the best grapes, the vintner wants branches to grow thick, closest to the vine. In today's lesson, Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. What does that mean? There are at least two different ways to think about this little vine and branches parable, and which we choose can make a world of difference. In one interpretation, the center of the story is a clear hierarchy. It's established by the story. God the Father is the vine grower at the top of the power chain. Jesus is that thick, enduring vine, and we humans are the thinner branches that come and go year by year. In this hierarchy, the branch is entirely dependent upon the vine, without which it will die. The only active character in this story is God the vine grower. He has legs, of course, to move about, while the vine and the branches are rooted in place. And consistent with this stratification, the higher down to the lower, if the branch isn't producing enough grapes for the vine grower, it's cut off because it's worthless to the vine grower. What matters is the vine grower's judgment. In this telling, we humans could be deemed worthless without God and Jesus. Apart from me, you can do nothing, Jesus is said to have said. Life is a series of regular evaluations in this story. Each year we're judged by God based on what we produce, the quality and the quantity of our grapes. Regardless of factors beyond our control, like the weather, even regardless of whether we've been fabulously successful, God will still regularly cut us back, tear us from what is our life source. We have to begin all over again in the next growth cycle. It's just the innate plight of the branch, as some have felt that original sin is the innate plight of the human. Of course we'll fail and need a new infusion from the vine. Some call it forgiveness. Being cut from our life source may feel like suffering, but it's for the good of the vine and the vine grower, so we must endure. Only the vine grower, God, has that superior knowledge, the best overall perspective of the vineyard. We human branches must passively accept. Does that interpretation sound familiar to anyone? Sadly, I'd say it's the predominant one that's told by many Christians. It may be the one that you have learned. Even as I restate it to you, it makes me feel heavy. I feel the burden of it. If this is the Christian good news, why would anyone want it? There are some aspects of this first understanding of life that are a gift. When I am filled with hubris, it is good for me to recall that God is God and I am not. But when any of us is struggling with a sense of being worthless, when our challenge is based more in self-doubt than in pride, then it's hard to hear this statement attributed to Jesus. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Nothing? Does Jesus really diminish us so? Or is there another interpretation of the vine and branches story, one that the church, over its many years invested in maintaining hierarchies, has never stressed? Jesus, the man, you see, by his actions, seemed irked by hierarchies. It's odd that the whole structure of his story would begin with that framework. Jesus didn't diminish people, he dignified them. He chose as his disciples not those who were perfect, but the stumbling, and he trusting in the fact that they could learn. He valued the outcast, he healed the wounded, he cast no one aside as worthless. It was the world that did that. And of course, at King's Chapel, we're convinced that as thinking people, endowed by the Creator with brains and reason, we do have choices about how to interpret the Bible. Of course, not based on what we just prefer to hear or the easiest way to interpret it, but based on what we understand to be true, based on our knowledge, our reason, and life experience. So consider perhaps this second interpretation of the vine and the branches. In this case, the undergirding architecture is wonder and astonishment at the gift of life, life that surrounds us every moment. Even in the ordinary sights we see that walk along the esplanade, the smallest weed pushing up through a crack in the sidewalk. And these ordinary things Jesus sees the makings of his holy stories. In those normal Palestinian vineyards just growing from the dirt on the side of the road, Jesus sees a parable. In the faces of the ordinary people hearing his words, Jesus sees remarkable, unique, holy creations full of potential. Each branch, each woman and man worthy material to be spoken of. Jesus underscores that within all people, as surely as within plants, there's a remarkable ability to grow, even from parts of our lives that have seemed deadened, gnarly, ugly to the eye, like the vine that is left after the end of the season, even from rough phases of our lives that appear to be as tough as bark. Even there, new growth can spring forth, like that annual burst of a new branch from the grizzled vine. But more, Jesus tells people that the life source that nourishes him, that secret formula that seems to set him apart, is already flowing in them too, in us. What flows inside the vine flows in the branches, he says. Sometimes we call it the Spirit. Others call it love. Rather than a top-down hierarchy of God above in the heavenly clouds and humans far below on earth, of God outside us, the master, and we standing apart, the servants, Jesus tells a parable of intimate connection about the divine within all of us humans, of the close shared life between the vine and all the branches. The vine actually can't bear fruit at all without branches. Jesus' Spirit needs others now within which to live. When the Spirit that lived in Jesus is united with new branches, new people, they flourish too, and love is known. Our lives are not meant to be lived separately, but intertwined in community with one another, connected to the life source, pushing, pulsing within all of us, as it was in Jesus. Jesus says, abide in me, and I, as I abide in you, abide, stay, live, dwell within me. Jesus tells us his life spirit will abide in you, staying, never abandoning you. We all are already a vessel of the holy. Can we see that? The divine within every person, the power each of us has to love beyond our limits without fear. In this view, Jesus, you see, is an amazing archetype of someone who learned to be fully human, fully his authentic self, though others did not want him to. Siddhartha is another archetype who became fully human as Buddha, according to the Buddhist tradition. Both found a spirit of truth and compassion that was pulsing within them as we can. Pittman McGehee is an Episcopal priest who became a Jungian analyst, convinced that's how he could help people to walk. He could walk with people as they learned to live their own lives authentically, doing the hard work of setting aside the false expectations that we tend to cling to from our society or our family of who we're supposed to be. This is what he would say. The truest meaning of morality is not about following the rules, but about being true to yourself. The words good and God come from the same root, which means fit for a purpose. Goodness is not a moral judgment or an authoritarian evaluation of one's ability to conform and adapt. Rather is to serve the purpose for which you were created, which is to be the best possible you. The greatest moral question then becomes, are you going to be you? Are you going to be your true self? Or are you going to be what people or society want you to be? That word sin, it comes from the Greek, hamartia, which means to be off the mark. Sin really means not being true to yourself, or as Joseph Campbell phrased so elegantly, following our bliss. It's not easy. What does the parable of the vine and the branches say to you? What could it say? We live in constant hierarchies. We're accustomed to our achievements being measured and the brutal consequences when we fail. We've all heard about the rampant claims of many Christians that there's only one true vine, with everyone else cast into the fire. That hierarchy interpretation seems consistent with much of life around us. So it makes sense that we buy into it often, doing our best to scramble to the top of the heap, or at least ensure our God's up there, not other religions' gods. But isn't reality so much more than what we see around us? What is the life force that courses through you? Along the esplanade, which really is the reality, the gray bare branches we saw last week, are what has arisen now. At the end of this service, Sean and I will have bowls filled with little clusters of purple grapes for you. Take them and enjoy their sweetness. Marvel at the miracle of life given us by the source of all life, the God of love. Taste and see for yourself joyous, joyous fruit from the vine.